You're listening to So You Want to Start a Business podcast, and I am your host, Ingrid Thompson. Today is an interview conversation with a difference. Rebekah Campbell is a truly amazing woman. I have followed Rebekah's business journey for quite some time, and when her publicist asked me if she could be on the podcast, I immediately replied, yes, please. Rebekah has recently published a terrific book, not a business book. It's a book that tells the story of how she found her husband through 138 dates, which is the name of the book. She decides to take some of the tactics that have been successful in building her businesses to finding her ideal partner for life, and it worked. The book is a great read about 138 dates, and intertwined are snippets of business wisdom from Rebekah. In this podcast episode, we walk through both. We talk about her businesses and we talk about the book. Hello, and thank you for being here, for spending your precious time with me and my guests. Business, and especially the financial side of business, has become overcomplicated, and I am here to simplify it. My business is healthynumbers.com.au, and I am on a mission to help every business owner understand how money works in their business, because I believe everyone deserves to be financially savvy when it comes to understanding how money works in business. In this podcast, we meet business owners and we delve into their wisdom, their lessons learned, to offer easy business life hacks and debunk common business myths. I'm keen to give you tangible, tactical tools, tips and tricks to revolutionize how you build and grow your own business. Rebekah certainly gives us real tactics to use in business and in life. Here's Rebekah Campbell. Hello, and here we are today with Rebekah Campbell. Rebekah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Great to chat.
Thank you. And Rebekah, where in the world are you right now?
So I'm actually in New Zealand. I've spent the last 20 years in Sydney, although I grew up in New Zealand. And we came back last September. My husband got a job here, and we weren't in lockdown until a couple of days ago. So we've just spent we're in day 3 of our lockdown now in New Zealand, and I have a 3 and a 5-year-old running around. So you may hear them in the background of this interview. I'm doing shifts with my husband, Rod. So he's on right now.
We won't keep you too long from them. We're hearing all kinds of things in the backgrounds as people are living with stay-at-home orders and doing our best to do what we have to do. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about, we're going to talk about 2 things with Rebekah, and there's a really good reason Rebekah's here is because she's recently written this fantastic book, and we're going to talk about that. And Rebekah also has a really, really strong entrepreneurial tech startup background. So we're going to talk about the business first, and then we'll kind of segue into the book. So sure. And you have a business now, don't you, as well? So can you tell us what is it? Because you're kind of in a business now as well.
It's evolving, I would say. I mean, so I did build a relatively large business, and then I had a baby, and then I decided that it just wasn't, as much as I loved what I'd built and I was proud of the team, I didn't feel like it was my life's calling. And particularly when having a young baby at home, to take time away from that baby, I wanted to feel like this was my life's work, so to speak. So I've been on a mission to find that for the past, that baby is now 5, so for the past 4 years at least, and we have a second baby as well. So I started initially consulting, using my kind of tech founder background to consult to larger businesses and also to other business, startups who were kind of at an earlier stage and wanted support. And then I kind of built a bit of an agency around that. So there was other founders who wanted to also consult and teach. And a lot of that stopped when the COVID lockdowns were called. I've always written blogs and columns. I had a column in the New York Times, which was quite popular. And then, so I had been toying with this idea of writing a book. And I had an idea for a book, which we'll come to and talk about later. But I really, as soon as COVID hit, I kind of switched off thinking about the business too much and focused on writing that book, which has just come out. And I've also been doing some work for the city of Sydney, under the guise of my original business, around supporting Sydney's business community out of COVID, which is, it's gone kind of back into a really hard time, but we did kind of 18 online events for them. And so I'm just, at the moment, I'm working out what the business does Really,
I
and
think
what I'm most passionate about and enjoy doing as well. So,
and it's such, I think many of the people listening are in the same boat. It's really, what is it that we want to do? And I have a question about the switching around a little later. But you've had a couple of previous businesses, and you were part of what is an extremely, incredibly successful business. Can you tell us about, give our listeners an overview of those businesses, please?
Sure. So my first business, I started pretty much out of, excuse me if you can see screaming in the background. My first business I started straight out of uni. I organised a concert when I was at university to raise awareness of kind of youth mental health in my hometown. And then I got offered a job. So Neil Finn from Crowded House played at that concert, and his manager offered me a job. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be in business, but I went to Sydney to work for him and his company, which I did for a year. And then I was like, this is a pretty cool business, actually. And I'd started managing my own little band on the side, who, if you're in Australia, you know the band called George. And at that stage, they were totally unknown, but they were doing well under my very young and inexperienced management. But I decided to leave and go full-time into my own band management business about a year to 2 years after I started. And then I signed my next client, which was a group called Evermore. And then over that kind of 8 years, I was like around about 8 to 10 years, I built one of Australia's largest independent music companies, where we did management. I had a record label. I had a merchandising company. I had partnerships. I had an office in New York and London through partnerships. And we had 11 artists. So that was a super fun business for my 20s. When I reached 30, I started to, I guess, look at the music industry. There wasn't really many women to look to who, other than concert promoters, and I didn't feel like, I had a massive passion for promoting concerts, and music wasn't really my life. I'd kind of fallen into it. As fun as it was, I didn't see myself going to gigs for the rest of my life. And so I thought it was time to do something else. And it was really hard, actually, because I'd built this successful, profitable business, but because it was a personal management business, I wasn't building an asset I was able to sell. And so, I wish I'd, in my early 20s, when I thought about getting into this business, thought, okay, am I building something I could ever sell? And maybe stop myself and build something else. But because I could not, sell off my management contracts, I essentially had to dismantle the business and really get very little for it, which was a big leap of faith that I would be able to find something that would be as successful as that again, that I might enjoy more. And I jumped into tech because the Social Network movie had come out, and it just seemed like the next logical thing to do. It was a sexy industry like music, but and I could take lots of the skills that I'd learned in music and kind of apply them to building a tech business. So I was a founder, kind of looking for a problem really to solve. My initial idea was to help bands sell tickets to concerts. That semi-failed. It worked, but it wasn't ever going to be profitable. So I was able to sell the software, at a loss. I lost money doing it, but I learned it heaps. And then I built a recommendation app for cafes and restaurants, which merged with Beat the Queue, which was a payments app for cafes and restaurants, and became Hey You, which is now a relatively large ordering payments recommendation app for cafes and restaurants in Australia.
Yeah, and Hey You, oh my gosh, what a fantastic story. Like, honestly, Rebekah, and I think, for the listeners, what was so important around that music and the personal management there is that there was no asset. So when it came to you wanting to move on from that, yes, you had a business, but it was you and your business, and you were your business. And I think that's the thing that happens so often with anything that's a personal service. So Hey You went on to be quite a success, continues to be, and very successful. I became aware of Hey You because my partner was in the city, and this is my experience of Hey You. He loved it because he could order his coffee, he could go downstairs, pick it up and walk back upstairs to his desk, or walk to wherever he was going to have his coffee without that having to stand around. And I think that was, that was one of the huge benefits of it. And it was a double-sided business. When you first started your business, what did you want? So you talked there about the music industry, and in your 20s, you were looking for not being part of the business, so you had a job. And then in the tech business, you were looking for something that was more like building an asset. But what, for you personally, what was it that attracted you to being in your own business?
I just have always been that way inclined. I think I always was entrepreneurial when I was a kid. I could never imagine myself working for somebody else. And I did get this job for Neil Finn's management company. And I discovered that was the first and only job I've ever had. And I did discover that I made a pretty lousy employee. I was 22 years old and I was constantly arguing that things should be done differently. Yeah. And, it must have been very annoying because a lot of my ideas probably were not very good. But I was very forceful, and I just wanted to get up in the morning and come in with an idea and do it. That was just, and I didn't understand why I couldn't do that working for somebody else. Which I now understand, being a business owner and having people work for me. It just doesn't work when you get to a certain level of organization. But I think I needed to do that. And after that experience, I had George, and they were doing quite well. And I was torn as to whether I should start my own management company or whether I should go and work I got offered a job at a record company. It was like doing A&R for Sony Music. And I remember I had the interview, and the guy who was running it was really nice. The guy who was running A&R, not who's running the company. But the A&R manager was really lovely. And I had to fill in an HR form, which asked what my expected salary was. And I had been earning $25,000 a year working for Neil Finn's manager. So very small salary. I thought this job probably pays quite a lot more than that. And so then I thought, okay, I'm 23. And so it's my 23rd year on the planet. How much am I willing to sell that for? And then I thought, 50 grand. I was like, no, it's worth way more than 50 grand. Then I was thinking 75. And I was like, 100. I was like, surely my year is worth more than $100,000. It's a year of my life. And I couldn't come up with a number of what it was worth. And so then I was like, I just thought, I'm just not built to sell my time. So I'm built to build my own thing. And that was when I realized I really should be doing my own business.
I love that answer, Rebekah. That is I don't think anyone's ever said anything like that before, in terms of being able to, because that is the struggle, isn't it? When you're building something that is your time. So one of my favorite questions is, when did the business feel real? So in all of those businesses that you've had, have you had moments when you've thought to yourself, this is real, this is a real business? And could you tell us an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in the music business. So I never had, because it was just my business, and I was the first and only employee, and then I started hiring people. I didn't raise capital. And so it felt very real because I had to understand the cash flow that was kind of coming in and going out. So, yeah, I remember particularly, both George, Evermore particularly, because that was completely in my own business, when they started to really take off and there was significant money coming in, that was when it's funny, because music, you can struggle for a really long time and make no money, and then all of a sudden you make a lot of money very quickly. So yeah, I remember feeling like, I was doing all this work to kind of push this roller coaster up a hill, and then it took off and I just had to hold on and manage it. And that was when it felt like, okay, this is something. This is no longer a struggle.
Fantastic. I love that. Thank you. And that question gets a different answer from everybody. It's so good. Okay, so can we talk about understanding customers? Because the people listening, they've got their idea, they want to have a business, and to have a business, you have to have customers. And when we think of the Hey You business, it was a two-sided business model, wasn't it? It has the B2B and then the B2C, where you've got the business to business is you as Hey You talking to the cafe and restaurant owners. And then you have the end customer, who's the person who's got the app on their phone and their payment details in there. When you were starting out, how did you get information and data about
the take-up rate, what it was likely to be like, what sort of benchmarks, data. And do you have any advice for people around that B2B side, for people that are prospecting and just getting an idea of how that's going to work?
I mean, when we merged with Beat the Queue, had already done a pretty good job of building the foundations of the business. So with Posse, which is my business that merged, we scaled very quickly. So we had a lot of customers, and I gamified an app so that people would recommend lots of places. And then I also gamified it for the shops so that the shops would constantly see these like recommendations from their customers coming through, and photos of their customers saying nice things about them. So I kind of gamified both sides of it so that it grew really fast all over the world. We had 60,000 shops or something signed up, but there was no revenue model. So, and then Beat the Queue had not figured out how to scale. They were still, a very small number of shops, but not a large number of customers either. But those customers were really engaged, and they were paying, and there was a good little revenue model. So it was a small revenue model, but it was constant, and it was very slowly growing. And so we thought, okay, if we come together, then I can take some of what I know about marketing and growth and scaling something and apply it to what is at its foundations like a very compelling revenue generating product. So that was the premise behind creating Hey You. And we tried lots of things, and then we found a few little things that worked. I think that was the key message. Was at the beginning, we tried digital marketing, we tried even a bit of radio advertising, we had a big, we tried phone sales, we tried door-to-door sales, and we tried in-store promotions, and we tried handing out flyers and all sorts of things. But it was really going, okay, we would see a flicker of something working and then hone in on that one thing, and then just do that really well and forget about all the other stuff that wasn't working. So, and they were not like for the Hey You product, we learned, for example, that it really works to get a whole lot of places in the same area going. Like we learned what a good customer looks like in terms of what does the cafe look like that's going to be most likely to succeed on the platform. So we really defined that kind of customer profile. So there's no point in us wasting our time going to every cafe in the country. Let's focus on these profiles that are in the CBD, they're under office buildings, so we'd go for them first because we knew that we were going to get the most traction in those cafes. And then we'd go to all the other cafes around it. And then all those like flyers, digital marketing, none of that worked at all. What worked was having, a promo person inside the cafe converting the existing customers, and then they would tell and then it was word of mouth, and then getting those customers to tell other customers. And so it wasn't like you could just pour petrol on it like you can with digital marketing and it just scales. We had to go through the process of finding and training really good promo people, paying for them to go out to spend time in the stores, and then really investing and working out how do we get people to recommend this to their friends and get cafes to recommend it to other cafes. And that was kind of the whole way that the business grew.
Yeah. And what year is that, Rebekah? Can you remind us when we're talking about?
This is 2014, 2015 was when we were really scaling.
So the Instagram, Facebook might have been working a bit, but like some of that social media wasn't having the sort of, we look now and we would think social media would be, but you're talking about a time when this wasn't really working at all.
It still doesn't work. And it still doesn't work for that business. So it's just, you've got to look at what your business, so the characteristics of our business is people are only going to use an app to order and pay at a cafe if they go to that cafe already, or if we might be able to get them to move, but only to a very small area. So it's very difficult, even with like hyper geo, targeting to hit people on social media. It's just too wide an audience. So you actually need to get out there and get in, meet people, talk to them, get that initial group going, and then that group will recommend people. So
I'll take it.
Yeah, we just learned that was the only way to scale the business.
And what we've found really interesting in this stay-at-home order, because we're only allowed to be a few kilometres from home, so we're using our local cafes instead of the city cafes, which and people don't want to hey you to a local cafe because they actually want to drop in and have a chat to the barista because it might be the only person they're actually chatting to all day. So that that's another challenge for this part. And then of course there are the people who want to just drive past and pick it up. So you do have some of the cafes near us are not using it. I did some research in preparation for this, and that's what they came back with and said that people want to come in and have a chat.
Yeah. Well, if it's not locked down, I mean, I think it's kind of been a bit of a boom for the lockdowns, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne and stuff, because you can't go in and have a chat to your barista. You have to click and so collect. Therefore, all of those local cafes have had to get on board with a business like Hey You. So it has been.
And they've had to find ways to pay because cash is gone and people don't want to tap their cards and that sort of thing. Can I ask you a question about the payment? Because you obviously the business, if we stay with the Hey You business, it was at a time before people were using Uber Eats and the 30% charges and the 20% charges that people have to pay, like the restaurants and cafes. So you're actually bringing a fairly new concept to the marketplace at that time. Yeah. What sort of, because that's a difficult thing to be the first player in the market. What sort of conversations did you have to have with cafe owners and restaurant owners for them to say, I'm happy to pay you a percentage of my coffee, on my $3, $4 of a coffee?
You can turn it off at any time, I guess is one. I mean, it was hard for us because you can't argue as clearly with a business like Hey You, an app like Hey You, that you're bringing in new customers. I mean, we definitely do bring in new customers who want to order and pay digitally, but it's not as clear as something like Uber Eats where you're ordering from a platform. It's really, they're doing the marketing for you. This is an order that you wouldn't have normally had, and therefore you're willing to pay a higher margin. So Hey You has always charged much lower margins than Uber Eats or any of those other aggregator platforms, because a lot of the business is going to be converting existing customers to pay more efficiently. It's such a broad spectrum of pricing there, isn't it? And just on pricing, how did you choose that percentage or that cost to the business? How not what the amount was, but like what was the philosophy? I know Beat the Queue had already developed a revenue model. What was the sort of strategy of getting pricing? Because it is one of the things that people really struggle with pricing. I think they had built a revenue model, and it was starting to generate revenue that I think they probably had undercharged. I think that's a very common thing that startups do, because they wanted to get customers, right? Which is what sometimes you've got to do that. I wouldn't say that they necessarily made a mistake by doing that, but it was a very low margin that they were charging, and it was a gradual process of trying to increase that margin, and so enough so that it was still creating exceptional value for the cafes, and also that we were able to run a business that it's now a profitable business, so that Hey You itself had to be profitable, otherwise it wouldn't have worked. So it's just finding that balance of creating enough value for the customer and being able to run a business that's profitable. And
thank you. One more money question, and then I shall move on to one more team question, and then we'll get to the book. Sure. So before your family needs rescuing, you've talked publicly about, for Posse, you wouldn't have raised, and you've written about it as well. And as you said, you're quite popular in New York Times. You were a very popular column on the New York Times. You've written about not having had so much funding. You would have bootstrapped earlier. But a business needs money. I mean, in the book you talk about, you knew that in 5 months there would be no more money for payroll, and the day you walked into the bank and you took all your money out to pay for the business. And you said there, that Posse at the beginning cost you everything, but we need money. So how would you get that right if you were doing it today? Because 2021 is a different world. What would you say to people now about, how much runway do you need to have? How do you bootstrap?
I mean, so when I launched Posse, it was a very different time in the kind of tech ecosystem, where we just didn't know as much as we know now. And there wasn't, the Lean Startup book hadn't been published. And not that, the Lean Startup is everything, but definitely, I mean, I would have been much clearer about that. I felt like the lessons that I learned in Posse, which was I raised money, I built this site or software product, which enabled people to sell tickets to concerts. So this is just the kind of the first example. And it worked. Like, people did sell tickets to concerts and we paid them a commission. But there was a lot that we learned through that process, which was, the customers that we were bringing on, every time we signed up a customer, which was a band and their tour, we would have to get sign off from all of the different venues that they were playing at, from the booking agent, from the manager, from the artists themselves. And we had to have an integration with that particular ticketing platform, whether it be Ticketmaster or Ticketing. So it was just like extremely complicated to bring on board a customer. And then after 8 weeks, every customer churned because the tour was finished. So we had to go through it again with the next band. So it was just never going to, and we would make money from the commissions, but never enough to pay for the cost of sale to bring the customer on in the first place. So it was just never going to be a profitable model. So I think, I wish I hadn't spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building a website to find that out. Now I would have done a lot of that work and tried to actually, not just because when I went around the industry and asked people, everyone said, that's a great idea. We'll definitely use that. And we'd pay for it. But I think, you actually have to try and do it, in a bootstrapped way. And it's much easier to do that now. So with, the kind of consulting training platform that I've been working on, I was able to, for example, build a WordPress site using a theme pretty much myself and link it to Eventbrite to sell tickets. And then off you go. You've got a minimum viable product and you can see how the model is going to work. Yeah. So, and I could see that there were issues with that model actually as well. And so it is evolving as I'm kind of working out what the business is going to look like. So, but I didn't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars building a website to work that out. So I think just like really trying to get something going really cheaply using existing products like WordPress or Eventbrite or, whatever other platform makes sense.
And LinkedIn or, using the social platforms to actually see if anybody will take the money out of their pocket and put it into your bank. Because that's ultimately what you want. You want somebody to pay. Building a team, we can't do it all ourselves. What might you have done differently in terms of first hires, who you brought on board, and what difference did that make or would that have made?
There's a few things in that. I've never been a great people manager, and I don't think I ever will be a great people manager. It's just not my strength because potentially I'm not super organized. Like, I'm not a great project manager. I'm good with the vision and I'm a great communicator. So I have other talents, but I'm not necessarily a good people manager. But some of the things that I have learned is those first hires are so critical that, people who are really on board with, your vision, who are willing to, it's not just work hard, but it's put their an emotional and creative energy into the project. So it's very easy to kind of come on board and like tick boxes, but you want people who are going to come in those early days and care about the business and wake up in the morning with ideas and come in and share those ideas and point out when things aren't working and how they could be done differently and be passionate. So I think just spending, I am like naturally a super optimistic person. It's a good thing in some ways because it makes me really resilient, but it's also a negative thing in that when I interview people, I always see the best in them. I'm like, oh, this person, I look for the things that are great about them, and I don't see the so I did learn to try and get other people to interview my potential candidates. So I'd find people who were different to me, who weren't optimistic, who were good at looking for why is this person not going to work out, and I would get them to do interviews. So that was a really good tip. And I think probably another thing that I learned which is very similar to the relationship advice that I have in my book about when you find a partner, you choose someone and then you make it work. And it's the same with hiring people or with business partnerships, particularly when I've fallen out with a couple of business partners. And it's because I'm always looking for what's wrong. Like, why is he not working harder? Why is he going home and I'm still here? And you know, he said he was going to achieve this target and he hasn't got there. And he's like, and I would just be and then it spirals. And then I'd think, oh, if I found someone else, they would be perfect. And then all of this would be, you know, then that just never works. And the damage that does to you know, your energy and to your business is just like that. I've made that mistake twice and I would not make that again. I think when you choose a business partner, unless it's like, and I'm sure there are points where it's absolute like deal breaker stuff, sure. But when you choose a relationship, you make that relationship, you choose carefully and then you make that relationship work, which is the same with, you know, romantic partnerships. Like you spend all your time thinking, oh, am I in the right relationship? Is there someone better? Then it's doomed to fail. And the cost of failure in business partnerships is huge.
Yeah, as it is in personal as well.
Yeah.
Actually, something that came to mind when you were talking about that is an expression that somebody told me so long ago. It might have even been my mum, but I feel like I've known this expression for a really long time. And the expression is, when you don't like someone, the way they hold their spoon will annoy you. When you like someone, they can tip the entire bowl of soup in your lap and it doesn't matter. Yeah. And I think that goes to your point there about, the point about making it work. Yeah. So I am going to segue to the book there because I do have a question about that. So somebody in the book, so the book is 138 dates and it tells the story of you finding this ideal partner and making it work. But one of the parts in that is, and I'm going to go to my question so I get this right. Somebody says to you that there is this idea that everyone is looking for somebody better, somebody who's better than them. It follows a theme. It's Trent says everyone is jealous of the person who's accomplished a bit more than them. And it's not quite what you were just talking about, but what about Bill Gates? There's no one for him to feel jealous of, you say. And then Trent replies, what about Einstein or Tesla or Newton? And I found this an incredibly insightful part of your book. And this idea of people constantly looking for something else.
Yes.
What lasting impact did that have as you were searching for this right person? Is that to the same topic that we were just talking about there?
I mean, I don't know if it affected my search for a romantic partner. It certainly affected my kind of like how I felt about myself. So I would go to these business conferences or networking events, or, you know, this was a particularly difficult one because I was in Maui with, you know, the kind of world's tech elite, the founders of Twitter and Tango, and I was rooming with the founders of Canva, and I was just feeling really like, I mean, it was entrepreneurs and kite surfers. So not only was everybody young and incredibly successful, they're also like, you know, much more fit and better looking than me, and like wearing bikinis on the beach. And so, you know, just all of my anxieties kind of piled up. And it was just, I did notice when I was reading tech press or whatever, that, you know, people who were younger than me were having more success in their businesses. And I would start to think there must be something wrong with me and why I wasn't. And then I'd feel jealous. And then at this conference, it was just kind of, I was overcome with it. I was overcome with jealousy and inadequacy. And I felt physically ill that, you know, all these people were so much more successful than me. And then I met this guy, and he'd sold 3 companies, and he was beating himself up about not having an IPO on the NASDAQ. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This guy's like worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And he's just like, oh no, I should have done it by now. I'm 40 years old. And all these other guys have done it. And I was just like, wow. And I said, if you think like that, do you think everyone thinks like that? And he was just, yeah, I think everyone thinks like that. That's here. And then the long-term impact, I did realize that the amount of success that other people had around me has absolutely no impact on me or my life or my quality of life. I should just be happy for them, because often they're doing, you know, they're exactly the right place for them, and they're making often a huge contribution through the work that they're doing. So feeling jealous is just such a waste of energy, because it's got nothing to do with you or your experience of life.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, to me, it just applies to relationships as well. You know, for someone who looks at someone who's in what looks like a happy relationship, you know, to be envious of that and to be wishing that was theirs. But let's go to the beginning of the book. And I love this. I'm just going to read this paragraph because I love this. It says, I tell this story expecting that I'll be criticized. People might say that a woman who claims to be a feminist shouldn't admit her top priority is to find a man. I would disagree. I think women should voice what they want in life without fear of judgment. I wanted to build a business, yes, but when I lay in bed, when I lay still in bed at night, love is what I ached for. I wanted a partner. I wanted a family. And I just love that you wrote this book for you, aged 35, because you write it in 2020, as you said, but it goes back to 2012. And this book is everything it promises in those beginning pages. And, you know, as you said, you've written a lot, you know, the New York Times, you've written blogs. And so you wrote this book in the closed down in Sydney last year.
Yeah.
But when you were doing the dating, were you at all thinking about writing a book? Because you have a spreadsheet and you kept track of everyone and you used the methodology. So how did the book, I mean, apart from the lockdown, like you said, you'd always kind of had your fingers on the keyboard thinking there was something else you wanted to write. Tell us about the book.
Well, I mean, the book came about because I did not think about the book when I was dating. All I thought about was finding love. I wanted to find I wanted to find a partner who I could wake up with in the morning. I was very lonely in my 30s, and I was also very afraid of the future. It was a really hard phase of life for me. And then at one point I was just like, right, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I thought of myself as this 80-year-old woman looking back on my life thinking, you know, I'm going to give it a red hot go. I'm going to give it everything I've got here because this is what I actually really want. And so that's what I did. And then at the same time, I was writing business columns and blogs and things. And I got approached by a publisher to write a book based on the column, which was around women in tech and the challenges for women in tech. And I started writing it, and I felt a bit bored and flat, to be honest, as I was writing. It was just more, I felt like a lot of people have talked about these issues, and it's kind of it was a bit whingy, and it's just that this is not really what I want to put into the world. And at that stage I had met Rod, and we had a young baby. So we met and we got pregnant very quickly, 6 months after we met, actually, which was planned. But and then I was pregnant with our second, and I was just so incredibly happy. I was like filled with joy, and my life had just changed. It was almost like being in a different paradigm or something. And I thought, this is what I've got to share. And I did think people are going to criticize me because they expect me to be talking about business and about, you know, feminist issues and things like that. It's the kind of sexy thing to write about at the moment, not I want to find a man. But I just wanted to be honest. That is what I wanted. And I'm so glad that I did it, because it has changed my life and has created so much value, and I learned so much of that through that process. And I wanted to share it, you know, both just as a story, because I thought it would make a kind of story that I would want to read, whether I was looking for a relationship or not. And if anyone out there is looking for a relationship, then I just wanted to share everything that I'd learned.
Wow. And I honestly, having read the book, I enjoyed every page of it. And I love what the way you've described some of the awful people you met, but also some of the lovely people that you met, and how excruciating it was to do the breakup sometimes. And I think you got some really good advice from your mum early on, is like to be honest and to call it pretty quickly. But I love the input-output goals. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I don't want to give away anything in the book that would make it, but I love how you kind of weave business back into the book. You know, it's not a business book, and clearly it's not, but there's this tiny bit of business comes in every now and again, and you relate it back to the business. But I really liked this concept of input-output goals.
Sure. I mean, I've always been a goal-driven person. So I've always set goals every year very clearly, you know, the main goal and then the sub-goals. But so I looked at this the same way. When I was 34 and I woke up one Christmas morning, you know, at my friend's parents' house. I thought I've got to do something about this. And so I approached it the same way as I approached business, because that's just what I knew, and that I knew that I was good at. So I was like, this works for me, this kind of goal-orientated approach and sticking with things. So I'm going to apply the same thinking to finding a relationship. And so I thought about setting what goals would I set around, this is in 2012, for the year in terms of finding a relationship. And my goal was to find a husband. But then, this is the input output thing. So in business, whenever I'm setting goals, I set output goals. So for example, my goal for that year might have been to raise $1 million to get seed funding for Posse. So it wouldn't be, an input goal would be, I will give 20 presentations in the hope of raising $1 million. But really that doesn't matter. And what matters is the output, which is getting the money so you can start the business. So it's like, I'll do whatever it takes to get, my goal for the year is this output of raising $1 million, or, getting 10,000 customers or whatever. That's the output. So I'd always set my business goals in terms of output. So when I thought about the relationship goal, I originally thought, find a husband, that's the output. But then I thought, well, what if I don't find anyone by the end of the year? And I'm not going to kind of marry off myself to someone who's not very nice just to meet a deadline, just to achieve my goal. And so I decided that my relationship goal should be input based. So that would be how many dates I would have. So that was what led to, okay, I'm going to go on one date every week for a year. And then that's the input, that's what I will do. And then I will learn through that process. And then it's up to God or fate or whatever to determine what happens.
Yeah, I love that. And then there was this the tasks that sat underneath that, it's like buy the right dress and get your hair done. And, there was all the maintenance that sort of went to, and how many, I love the numbers there, because I think this is what's important, whether it's business or dating, is that to get that one date, if you work backwards, because you were using some of the dating technology that was available then, is, how many people's profiles did you need to screen? How many kisses, blows, swipes did you need to do to get to those? So you talk about the sort of the numbers and how that whittled down. So you actually use that lean technology idea of the minimum viable product and then just iterated as you went through in those early days, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I started totally, and then I started creating guidelines for myself. So I mean, one example was after my third date, which was it was a second date. We went out, I met him, and I thought this guy's going to be really smart, which was one of my criteria, because he was a game programmer. And then it turned out that he was actually a gamer. So he played games at his parents' house, which is where he lived all day. And he was quite nice. I felt bad because he was really nervous about the date, but it just was not a good fit. And so I had to kind of go through this very awkward dinner, and then the next couple of days later reply and say, look, it was really lovely meeting you, but I don't think there's a good match, enough of a connection for a relationship kind of thing. So then I started thinking, okay, how could I remove that type of experience? Because it wasn't nice for either of us. So then I worked out, okay, I should be doing phone calls before every date. I could screen some of these people by doing calls. So then I got through into a system of, I would message during the week, and I would line up 3 to 5 phone calls on a Sunday. And then I would use one of those, at least 1 to 2 of those I would go on a date with on Thursday or Friday. And so that became a system. And then there's heaps more little tweaks and tricks that I learned and made notes of that kind of go throughout the book.
Yeah, and they're sort of scattered throughout the book. And I think one of the things that I found very amusing was that you used the same venues, which if you're in Sydney, they're recognisable. And the staff started wondering what on earth was going on, that you had to eventually get the staff on board with what you were up to.
Yes.
Yeah. And you did meet some very interesting and lovely and some really quite awful men. And when you look back on it, some of the one, so if you're doing 52 dates a year, so one a week for 52 is 2 years, this, when we get to the 138 dates, knowing that you were doing that, we know that this took a long period of time. But you actually took a time off as well, didn't you? You sort of had a break from doing it. How did you
only when I had been really hurt. So there was like a couple of
okay.
times. It was the one time where, I was pretty devastated after a really awful experience, which is in the book. And then I think there was a few months that I took off, but then I did get back into it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So generally I was,
Yeah. And you had some help, didn't you? You were seeing, there was a psychologist that you were seeing in Bondi Junction or in Bondi.
Yep.
And so you were getting a sort of a sounding board. I get the sense that there weren't many other sounding boards that you had, that it was pretty much you and this process.
I mean, it was, I had my therapist. I had a friend, Madeline, who was a big support, who's in the book. It's probably a couple of other friends that I had, one who was my ex-flatmate, who was not very, her advice was not great. And then I had my best friend as well, I didn't put her in the book just because just too many characters, essentially.
It was.
So there was a couple of others, but I was on my own a lot of the time. I didn't have heaps of friends. I was pretty lonely. Like, I worked a lot and I didn't have a lot of really close friendships. So I was on my own trying to figure this out. And I think that's where the book sort of could be your friend in this process for people who are in the same boat, because, it is a very difficult time when people are looking. A question about time. How did you get the time to do all of this? And, because people talk about getting the balance right for some exercise, for, visiting the therapist, for running your team, for building your business. You moved to New York at one stage and you were growing it there, and then you dated there, which is a whole other experience, which is quite fun to read and fascinating because it's so different. And, the maintenance to make sure you were on time for appointments and looking your best. How did you find time to do everything? I mean, I don't know. I didn't do lots of leisure things, I guess. I don't spend a lot of time watching TV or, even Netflix shows. I always see on Facebook all the people recommending these Netflix shows, and I'm like, I've not seen any of those shows. But I just was willing to invest the time in dating because I did think about the amount of value that finding a relationship would bring to my life. And that's like, health-wise, overall life enjoyment, having a family. I mean, there's an economic impact. There's a huge impact of finding the right partner has on your life compared to the impact of having a successful business, which also has impact. But I was putting so much time into the business compared to, and it's not like a little side project of occasionally going on a date now and then. And it was just like I worked out that I had the balance wrong in terms of like long-term value for me. And so I really put probably a huge amount of time into dating. I was on those apps hours every night, at least a couple of hours. And I was messaging at least 10 to 20 people at once. And then setting up phone calls, and a lot of them would drop off, and it's fine because I had volume. And I just I was willing to put the time in to do it.
Well, I was talking to somebody recently who was saying that to find a job is almost a full-time job to find a job. And, when I was reading the book and thinking about our conversation, is actually finding the right partner is a full-time activity. It does require, if you want the right person, it does require, really putting in the effort. If it's not someone you're going to be able to find in your network. So I'm just going to 2 more questions and then we're wrapping up. The response has been terrific. I've seen some wonderful reviews on LinkedIn from really, really lovely, emotional, honest reflections and some great coverage across other media channels. How do you feel about the response to your book, Rebekah? I know before we came on, you said it's early days and it takes a while, but how are you feeling about the work that the book is doing and can do?
I'm feeling, I love getting these messages from people. So when you're writing a book, it's pretty scary. For me, it was really scary because it was so personal. And I mean, my ex-boyfriend who died is a big character in the book. And it's my life. And I just didn't want it. I was afraid of it coming out and nobody caring. And as I was writing it, I was also afraid I'm putting basically 18 months full time into writing this book. And what if no one wants to publish it? Or what if no one's interested in it? And I would go through this roller coaster of some days I would think, this is the great, like I've written a really cool, something I thought was really good. And I think this is the best book ever. It's going to be huge. and then another day I would, something would happen and I would feel like totally dismayed that there's no one's going to read this. I'm totally wasting my time, kidding myself. So all I had to do was just, what I told myself was just to think about one person. And if this book could impact one person who needed to hear this message or learn this, some of what I'd learned through this process, and if I could, particularly if they were looking for a relationship or if they were in a relationship trying to make it work, if I could help them to have that successful relationship, which would change their life in the way that my life had been changed, then it would all be worth it. And so I kind of kept that image of that one person in my head. And so now, like, I'm getting, 10 or 20 messages a day from people saying really amazing things. So that is, now I feel like, that's what's important, more important than sales.
Yeah, it is. It's just beautiful. It's so worthwhile to get that. So right now, it's 138 Fates, the true story of one woman's search for everything. And it's Rebekah, spelled Rebekah Campbell, and it's everywhere that you can buy your books, whether that's the independent bookseller or online. And how do people contact you if they were to, because you've given us some terrific insight into being successful in business and being successful in finding the right partner. So, on two fronts, Rebekah, I'm enormously grateful of your time, and I know you've got some little people who are waiting to have you back. How do people contact you directly if they want to?
So I'm just at RebekahCampbell.com, so REBEKAH Campbell.com, or I'm on Instagram, Rebekah Campbell Writer, Rebekah Campbell Writer at Facebook.
Beautiful.
That's probably best places.
Any of those. And if you've read the book or if you're in a business and you want to tell Rebekah the impact that this conversation's had, do let her know. So as we draw it to close, is there anything else that you'd like to add that I haven't asked you, or that you'd like to say that's important for our listeners?
I hope people get the chance to read the book. If you are looking for a relationship, I think my big message is to stay optimistic and believe that the right person is out there. Don't give up, because it is worth it at the end. Your life can change really fast. And that's kind of like the one message that I like to leave.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. Rebekah, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Rebekah, for sharing so much of your business's stories and how you felt at the times through those different stages. And considering you had your small children waiting for you and just getting used to the stay-at-home order that you were living with. This is a rich conversation with Rebekah as she speaks pragmatically about her business experience as well as her search for love. What are your standouts today? She talks about goals and her goal-oriented approach to both business and to finding her husband. As you know, my mission is to help small business owners find lasting financial safety by helping them overcome their fear and frustration of the money stuff. To help you, I have created an online financial health check. It's a 15 simple yes/no questions about the money in your business. Go to healthynumbers.com.au/health check, all one word. This health check is completely anonymous and you receive a detailed, personalised report when you're finished. You can read it right there on your screen. If you want to actually receive a copy of your report, add your email address and you'll receive your personalised report immediately. Go to healthynumbers.com.au/health check. The aim is to help you understand where you are strong when it comes to your business financials and the areas where perhaps you're not as strong, and it suggests resources that I have created to help you. Stabilizing the financial side of business goes a long way to creating financial safety. When we pursue business and entrepreneurship based on core values and deepest integrity, and at the same time build a financially successful business, we live richer, fuller lives. As I always ask, what action are you inspired to take today? Till the next time, thanks for listening.